I'm going to talk about a truly incredible animal, coyotes, and take a look at some of the information about them in the urban setting, but also taking more of a concentrated look about Hanover County, where I've done most of my research for this particular topic. This particular map will show you how the population kind of moved into Virginia. The coyote is not endemic to or native to Texas or to Virginia. They were originally in Texas. And once mankind wiped out most of its natural predators, wolves, mountain lions, and things like that, the coyotes then migrated across the North America area and eventually got to Virginia. We do have some records of them being on the edges of Virginia in the 1950s, but for the most part, they were kind of moving in during the 70s and in the 1980s. So we have them pretty much everywhere nowadays. The Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources says that we probably have 50,000 in Virginia. However, that number may be low, they admit. And there's a nice looking fellow wandering through one of our areas and in front of one of my cameras. Now, they are present all over the Richmond metro area. We do have a lot of reports about them. Of course, my concentration was in Hanover, but I've heard from people in nearly every county surrounding Hanover of their existence there, and also even in the Richmond city area. There's a nice looking fellow that was published in the Richmond Times-Dispatch and being at 37th Avenue and Geary Street, pretty healthy looking little guy. And that would be just south toward the river from Churchill. So they're in the city for sure. Now, my initial goal in my research was to find out really how many coyotes we might have in Hanover and where are they in terms of their populations and such. The animal we're speaking about is the eastern coyote, Canis latrans, and they have a mixture. It's really a hybrid animal that we have in the east. It's about 1/3 coyote DNA, 1/3 wolf, and 1/3 dog. But this will vary per individual animals. Also, you hear the term sometimes coy wolf, and that's really not a scientific term that most people that study them will use, but they certainly do have a variety of DNA in there. It's a non-indigenous, naturalized wild canid. Non-indigenous means not originally from here, naturalized, it's now here, and it's in the dog category. It's very much an opportunistic feeder, quite an omnivore. It will eat practically anything and everything that might seem tasty to the animal. In research on what density we might have here, I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 coyote per square mile, but that may be low. That's only my hypothesis. And in other states in the United States, they range from 0.2 to 5 per square mile. So if we did a little bit of math, it's my belief, my hypothesis, that in Hanover County, we have 200 to 300 at any given moment. In the methodology that I used for my research, I was primarily using game cameras placed at good sites for several weeks, usually no less than 14 days, so that I would have a pretty statistical amount of data. We had over 10,000 camera nights that were collected of data. And we did some night observations with calls and night vision, but I'm probably not very good at that. I could hear them, but I could never see them. And they are very, very cautious in terms of where they will go and be seen. And so I didn't have a lot of luck that method. So primarily using game cameras. I did have a lot of assistance from citizens who had their own game cameras set up on their properties. And they provided me with some great images in our study. Looking at these three shots, the picture in the upper left will show you kind of a typical setup. It's on a trail, and you'll see a camera to the left, and it's pointing across. Initially in my study, I used to put dog food up on a 4-foot post or 4x4 post and try to attract coyotes to come up, sniff it, maybe eat it. But that didn't work too well, as I will show you later in some of my research. Basically, we would mount the game cameras about at least 3 feet above the ground and set it to capture images that would come through. The most successful method we used was to dig a fake foxhole and to soak into that hole in the immediate area fox urine. Yes, you can buy fox urine. And that worked well because coyotes don't like foxes, and they will hunt them down, chase them off, and even kill and eat them. So it turned out to be a pretty good bait to get some good images. Some interesting behavior from the literature that you might find interesting. They can travel as much as 5 linear miles per night or per day. So they move around a lot. They don't stay in one confined area as some species do. They sometimes will live in packs with a dominant female, but often will hunt as solitary individuals. And they are very much aware of traps, cameras, calls, humans, dogs, horses. And in fact, I had a lot of trouble with them, as I mentioned before, coming into calls. Regarding the horses, they are very cautious around horses and also donkeys. And I'll share a little story about them later regarding those. We had a great video, which we're having trouble launching. So I think not to eat up a lot of time, what I will do is just skip over this. But if you observe the video of them, they are bobbing their head up and down, looking right and left, and walking usually very cautiously, except in some areas where they feel like they have to travel very fast to get from one place to another. So the data that we obtained, we used a software that's called Presence, and it's a software that looked at an occupancy model, whether the animal was present or absent. So it did estimate occupancy and detection probability. However, it's almost impossible with the behavior of this animal to measure abundance and density in an area. But one other software that we did use, which is used a lot in the fish industry, is just a thing called catch per unit effort. And that we could use some detection by habitat, which I'll share with you in a minute. So the present software said that coyote occupancy in Hanover County is about 76.8%. So they're well spread out across the county, as you'll see. The detection probability was maybe low at 16.8%, but a lot of that is because of the behavior of the animal. They are not easily detected or seen. And as I mentioned, they do have a tendency to move around a lot. And so that creates a lower number. This is a map. We're going to look at that for a few minutes of where our observations turned out to be. The green dots are where the coyotes were detected with game cameras, but also some kill results from some hunters that provided me with the evidence. The red dots are where they weren't detected. Cameras were up, but no detection occurred. Now, if you'll notice that most of these observations were in the western half of the county, in other words, west of Interstate 95, which is in the center point of the county here. Some areas we put out cameras and got no detection. For example, up in this area, we know they're probably up there. However, they were never passed through our cameras and not detected, so we had to put the red dot at those locations. Some interesting outcome for these. If you'll notice in these two pictures, the image on the left of a deer is a healthy looking young buck. The exact same camera later found a coyote on the same property at a different date. So on November 18th, we had a deer. On November 27th, we had the coyote walking through because we left these cameras up for at least 2 weeks. This particular spot is showing a power line area. In the upper left here, you can see a pole, which was an electrical pole. And so that gave us some indication of some of that, their preference to walk and move in these power line habitats. Now, I mentioned the statistic catch per unit effort. And if you'll take a look at this diagram, in the upper part of the pie chart, on the left, farm and fire trail locations, 28%, power line locations, 33%, and at the bottom, non-power line locations. That would be something like the edge of a meadow, edge of a field, something like that. And if you add up the numbers, we see that this statistic indicates that 61% of my observations occurred, that's the 28 and the 33 together, occur in power lines, fire trails, and farm roads. So in kind of a summary, where do we best find them? Power lines, fire trails, farm roads, near streams, and primarily in the western part of the county. Now we see a guy dashing here. That, by the way, was at a power line on the northeast side of Ashland, a very large power line. So we did get some pretty good images. And when they were moving in a place like that, they're not walking along. It's so open, but in their preferred movement area, they're moving quite quickly. I want to point out some things about how do I know a coyote from, say, a fox? Well, primarily, if you look at this image, you'll see a tail on the animal has a dark area of fur. And the coyotes generally always have this dark tip on the end of their tail. Also, look at his legs. His legs don't have any black fur. Fox do. So that helps me determine one animal from another. But the other indicator would be if I have a reference there in terms of sight, I would know that this is a coyote because they are much larger than a healthy fox. Well, I say quite a bit larger. And they're generally about the size, when they're healthy, about the size, medium size of a German Shepherd dog. In our study, we rarely ever found them near houses. However, one homeowner did send me this. Notice also, again, the tip of this animal's tail is black. So that's a coyote. No black fur on the legs, again, supporting a coyote. And he's near a house, but in no locations. I think the closest I ever saw one come to a house in my data was about 100 yards away. So a little unique. They don't like to necessarily come near houses.
So Dr. Groover, do coyotes mate for life or not?
No, they don't. I've had no indication that they do. Now, there may be some pairs that, as long as one of them doesn't get killed, might stay together. But to my knowledge, they do not mate for life.
Okay, and when hunting, do they hunt more or less in pairs, in packs? Do they hunt, are they solitary? How does that work?
Well, for the most part of what I've been told and observed, I've not observed any hunting, but this is from people who have observed them. Maybe they were deer hunting and saw a bunch of an animal running from a coyote. They will often, if they are hunting a larger animal, let's say it's a doe deer, they have been known to hunt in a group, maybe two of them chasing a deer and another one further down a expected route waiting to attack the animal. But for the most part, most of the coyotes that we have, it's my belief that they are solitary hunters. And again, when we take a look at what they eat, you'll see why you don't need a pack of them eating.
Okay, so Dr. Groover, you mentioned that they don't often come close to houses. What would induce them to do that? Would there be a food source maybe, or?
Yeah, there was one family that, in fact, I have had a couple of families that had them come in their backyard. And in one case, a bear had come into the backyard, turned over their trash can. And after the bear finished his little munchies, then a local coyote came over to enjoy some of the buffet. It's obviously food that is the attractant. So as long as you keep trash cans closed, and of course prevent any animal from popping it open, you pretty much don't have them come up to an area. Now, I did have one landowner who had a chicken farm, and whenever she had a dead chicken, she would take the dead chicken and throw it over into the edge of the woods. Well, all that did was attract coyotes and fox to come near her property to eat the dead chicken. So again, food is the primarily motivation. And if you keep the food away from your house, you're not going to have a coyote coming by.
Are the eastern coyotes smaller than the coyotes in the west? Is the DNA mix different in the western part of the country as opposed to the east?
Well, the eastern coyotes are slightly larger. And I don't know why that's true, except it may have more wolf DNA in it, is what I might guess. But I think most of the people that study the DNA of these animals find that they're such a hybrid, a mixture of wolf, coyote, and dog, that creates a hybrid mixture. But we are finding that the eastern coyotes are a little bit larger than the ones in the west. So are they a problem? Well, for local citizens, maybe. They will eat domestic cats and small dogs. I have lots of reports of those disappearing. I had one site that had a lot of cats, and so I knew probably there were no coyotes within a general several miles of that site because there were so many wandering cats around, both belong to a landowner as well as feral. But they will eat every cat they might come upon and catch, and they will eat small dogs. And there's been even some Richmond media that have shown some dogs that have disappeared or been attacked. On the topic of rabies, yes, they can get rabies, although it's very rare. Yes, you could be bitten by a coyote. However, for the most part, in the last 10 years, there have been less than 160 bites by a coyote in the entire United States. And I think this is indicative of the fact that they don't want to be around humans. And so, unless they are cornered or captured, maybe they will try to bite. But for the most part, they run away from humans. For farms, that's a different issue. They are a problem for farmers. These are some reports that I found in the US Department of Agriculture dated 2015. That's the most recent data I could find. But they do have indication of deaths caused to lambs, sheep, goats, also to cattle. Now, with regards to the goats and such, that might be in Virginia more of an occurrence. We don't have as many sheep farms, but there's certainly the potential of that happening, as you'll see in some of the other data. This is a report that was done by the US Department of Agriculture. These are national numbers. And if you look at the column on the left that says predator and go on down to coyote, then in the center column, look at number. 16,000 of the deaths to cattle were caused by coyote. They are the number one predator of those farm animals. You can see some other interesting notes about grizzly bears and black bears and things. And this, again, is a national number. We do have some data from Virginia indicating, again, in 2015, when some of the research was done or collection of data occurred, that coyotes do represent the highest percentage of cattle deaths, and that it was about 40%, and there were 1,500 cattle killed. And then they took a look at calves, and of course, quite devastating for calves. Over 8,000 calves were killed again in 2015. That's in Virginia. Then looking at other domesticated farm animals, sheep lost these numbers, about 1,100 of adult sheep, killed 2,900 lambs in 2015, and goats suffered about 1,300. Now, if you added all of these up, you can see that coyotes could amount to over $1 million in losses for farmers in 2015. I want to also mention something about the goats. And I had a friend here in Hanover County that had goats as his livestock. And what happened was that the coyotes moved in and they killed all of his goats within several days. At one time, he used to keep all of his goats just wandering around his property. And of course, that made easy killing for the coyotes. Finally, he restored his goat herd and put them inside an electric fence with two very mean horses. And the coyotes, he observes them now coming near his farm, but the coyotes won't go near the goats anymore because they are scared of horses. And in fact, I do know some landowners that have put donkeys in a paddock with their animals, and a donkey will attack a coyote. They're very aggressive about that. I want to talk for a minute about the impact on deer. A lot of deer hunters were concerned about the increasing numbers of coyotes. It is true that a coyote will kill a deer, fawns, definitely older ones, and some does. The studies on the impact of deer do vary, but most researchers say that they don't do enough damage to deer populations to adversely affect the population of deer in Virginia. Well, do they have any value? Well, first of all, they do reduce rodent populations, anything from mice to rabbits and things like that. They also will eliminate feral cats. If you know, the word feral means a domestic cat, or from the generation of a domestic cat that has gone wild. And of course, feral cats do kill a lot of birds. So if you eliminate the feral cat population in an area, that would have a better effect on the birds. I've never seen any indication that a coyote has killed a bird. Of course, we'll come up on an interesting topic in a few minutes. They do maintain the balance of nature on the natural predators that might be here, because see, we've lost most of our natural predators. We've lost wolves and mountain lions. They're not in Virginia. They've gone extinct. So the coyote does have a value in maintaining the balance of nature as it exists in our state. A study that was done in Jefferson County Wildlife Department, it's an old study, but they indicated that 70% of their diet may be beneficial to humans. So that's potentially some justification for keeping them here. They are a great omnivore. They will eat fruit. They will eat lots of insects. They eat mice, rabbits, and of course, cats. So it's often a seasonal thing as well as what is available. And their feeding habits would be connected often to seasonality and what is the availability of that food. This will stand for itself. Okay, so does killing them solve any problems? Well, most research says no. In fact, the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources says that if you have less than 60% of them are killed, the local population will be restored within 1 year. They can be very prolific. It's hard to kill all of them. Any of the surviving females will then start producing larger litter sizes. Instead of having maybe 3 or 4 puppies, the surviving females might have 5 to 6 puppies. So in dealing with this particular animal, I think prevention is the best strategy, because you're never going to kill them all. And there are hunters in Virginia that do aggressively hunt them. I know 2 hunters in particular that kill somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 coyotes per year in Hanover. And they also harvest the skins. Kind of an interesting thing I found out when I went to one of the skin auctions. most of the skins that are purchased at the Virginia auctions are purchased for the Russians. They pack them up and they ship them out to the Russian, someone in Russia. And by the way, it is legal to kill a coyote 24 hours a day with virtually any kind of weapon, I guess. I wouldn't assume anyone trying to shoot a bazooka at them, but any kind of rifle, for example, as long as you don't shoot from a roadway or within a restricted distance of a house or toward a house. So they are aggressively hunted by some folks in Virginia. I want to talk about this for a minute. We all love the Wile E. Coyote stories, cartoons, and interestingly, though, a scientist in California, Dr. Michael Soule, did a great project on the coyotes at a Marine Corps base in California. What he did is he was able to remove and relocate every coyote and remove quite a distance away, every coyote that was at this Marine Corps base. Then he went back and did a population study on roadrunners. What happened was that the roadrunners, after the disappearance of the coyote, went locally extinct. And what happened was that the coyote didn't just eat roadrunners, and I guess that is one bird that they will eat, but or another one of the rare birds they might eat. But they eat a lot of other stuff. They would eat fox that might eat roadrunners or roadrunner eggs. They would eat snakes that might eat the roadrunner eggs. They would eat raccoon. So when you lost that apex predator, the coyote, then the roadrunner population suffered catastrophically and all of them ceased to exist. So the term we like to use in this case is that coyotes are actually a keystone species for this. And one other piece of fact, Mr. Wile E. Coyote, if chasing a roadrunner can only travel at about 20 miles an hour. A coyote at top speed will go 43 miles an hour. So if a coyote wanted to chase down a roadrunner, we love the cartoons, but if he wanted to chase down a coyote or a roadrunner, the coyote would definitely be able to do it. I want to show you a few pictures and talk about when you might observe them or where they might be seen. The picture in the upper left was taken, as you can see, at 10:58 a.m., almost 11 o'clock on a morning. And then over on the right at a different location, there's another coyote. And notice the black tip on his tail and no black legs. He was captured on image at 10:58 p.m. They are not always nocturnal. When they become nocturnal is usually in the presence of human activity. So you can see them at all times of day. There's a piece of evidence of one at nearly at 11 o'clock in the morning. They also can have varying variations of coloring. This is a black coyote that was observed in Western Hanover at about 7 p.m. one night. And I understand he may still be out there. I've heard reports that they've seen him occasionally. Funny story back to time of day. Now, the picture on the left shows a nice, healthy coyote at 4:22 in the morning on the 17th. And if the exact same camera at 9:30 on October 7th had a whole lot of turkey there. Now, again, coyotes move around a lot. They don't sit in one area and wait for the food. They don't have their range can be quite large. If this coyote had just shown up on October 7th and sat in the woods hiding, he could have had a nice turkey dinner that particular day. We got a lot of funny images in the research. As I mentioned before, sometimes I was putting dog food on top of a post, and in this one case, a buzzard came by, ate all my dog food, and then just sat there for a while. If you look over on the extreme right, same post scenario, a groundhog climbed up the post. It's about a 4-foot post, ate the dog food, and then decided to sit there and kind of observe his surroundings. And then I did have a crow one time land on my camera, so that resulted in a fun image. Lots and lots and lots of deer. I'll bet in my 2 years research with game cameras, I know that I have over 300 images of deer. We do have a lot of deer in the Commonwealth of Virginia and certainly Hanover County. In fact, there was a statistic that came out, I think it was last week, that in Virginia, we had 61,000 accidents of drivers hitting deer. So there's certainly plenty of deer in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And these, of course, were taken in Hanover County. So people ask sometimes, well, what am I going to do with the data? And I hope to publish a scientific article in the Virginia Journal of Science. I'm also working up a report to provide to the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources for whatever they might be interested. And then in Hanover, I plan to, at a request, do some presentations in county, to the county at various locations. So if someone wants to contact me, and you might have a large group after COVID, hopefully, maybe in the fall, I'll be happy to come do a similar presentation with some more detail about what I found in Hanover County. Cute little cartoon. I want to thank the Virginia Academy of Science that gave me some small project funds for 2 years. The 20 plus landowners that allowed me to place cameras on their property, and numerous landowners that sent me images from their own game cameras. I like to do research with students, helping them have some experience. So I had over a dozen students throughout the 2 years that went along and helped with camera deployment. 2 graduate students, Mae Malloy and Morgan Bragg, helped me extensively throughout this research. And I have 2 special research assistants who might be listening in, Colin Bedell and Michelle Milligan, who assisted. So thanks to everyone in that category. All right, Jim, we're ready for questions.
All right, we definitely do have some stacked up here in the chat. So we do have at least one Hanover resident attending. So if someone has game camera footage from their own property, how would they get that to you?
You could send it to me by email. Sorry, I didn't provide that in the presentation. Probably the easiest one to remember is rgroover, Groover, no space, at Reynolds, REYNOLDS.edu. rgroover at reynolds.edu. And very much appreciate any of these. I'm kind of finishing up the study, but I'm probably going to stay involved in providing information about coyotes for quite a while.
Okay, and another question from Hanover County. if they're hearing coyotes at night, what kinds of sounds will they be making?
Well, they can make two kinds of sounds. In fact, you can go online and listen to these. The adults will sometimes howl, just like you've maybe seen in movies and things like that. But you will have some kind of chirping or yipping sounds. And those are very often found in when the adults have younger coyote, and the younger coyote are starting to move away from the den area. So it's a way of really the den activity maybe communicating. But if you can Google coyote sounds online and probably have close to 1,000 different recordings.
Okay, and that'll actually segue us very nicely into another question. How long do coyote pups stay with their mothers?
Only one season for the most part. So the right now, January, February is breeding season. So after the female becomes pregnant, she will begin creating a den area, which, by the way, would be supported and helped in terms of feeding by the male. It's not like some species like bears where they will chase the male away because the male might eat the baby bears. That does happen. But in this case, the male coyotes will help. So through the spring and early summer, you'll have a lot of den activity or a lot of actions going on in that neighborhood. Now, as we approach late summer and early fall, the young coyotes will start leaving the den and moving around. It is true that some coyotes become transient and not in a pack. And some, I don't know what's the stimulus where they were chased out or whatever, but they will be transient for a while or maybe for the rest of their lives. So there's a lot of research that has been done on some of that.
All right, so we have a guest that lives about 5 miles outside of Boston in a densely populated area. They're saying they have seen coyotes in their area. So where would those coyotes hide during the day?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm sure the case in Boston might be similar. In Chicago, they have over 50 coyotes in downtown Chicago that they are monitoring. It's my understanding that the coyotes are living in abandoned areas, in sewer systems, and they are living quite well. And for the most part, eat cats and rats. And in fact, that's a pretty healthy population. So making an analogy, I assume it's going to be similar to what exists in Chicago as Boston. What you may want to do is touch base with the wildlife resources people in Massachusetts and see who's doing most of the coyote research up in that area. And there probably is someone.
All right, Dr. Gruber, so you mentioned they're very commonly seen along power lines and roads. Would they normally hang out near those places, or are they going to spend more time in the woods? Or is it just that's along roads and power lines where they happen to be seen?
I think it's a mode of travel. It's a sort of a pathway they follow. They will nest up in wooded area or den in wooded area or sleep and live there. But when they move from point A to point B, they do like to keep an eye on what the surrounding is. So that's where we're seeing them. I don't ever see a coyote lay down and take a nap on my cameras, but what they will do is move through the areas and understand that some of my research is biased because I put the cameras in areas where I thought they may be moving. And that would be on trails and fire roads and along power lines. So that, to answer the question, It's primarily where they move. They're highways.
Okay, so if you could just follow up a little more on cattle predation. So are some of these going to be full-grown animals or just going to be primarily calves?
So in cattle losses in Virginia, and the data that they did have, the U.S. Department of Agriculture indicated that they had killed 1,590 cattle in 2015. Of course, there's no reason why they are probably not continuing to do it. And keep in mind that most cattle or most coyotes are primarily in rural areas where you might have some of those particular animals around. And they did kill and eat 8,570 calves. So we don't find, like a buffalo, that the cattle will aggressively try to protect their young. We do see that more in animals like buffalo. But for this particular, for cattle, I guess they just stand there and maybe run away, but the calves are often the food that's eaten. That's about all. But and again, this is not something that the Virginia Department of Agriculture researches every year, but they are aware of some of the issues that are occurring.
Okay, and do you see much variation in the phenotypic characteristics of local coyotes? So differences in appearance? Do you see a lot of variation?
No, for the most part, phenotypically, which was the physical presence, what I see is a lot like the images I've shown you. However, I did have someone supply a picture of that totally black one, and I've heard that they've continued to see him up in the western part of Hanover. But they generally always look, there's some variation, obviously, but for the most part, they look the same.
Do you know the occupancy statistic for the western part of Hanover specifically? Does it exceed 78%?
I don't think so, because most of the data was derived from there. So I think that's an accurate number for that. And again, keep in mind, these animals move around a lot, and they don't stay in one area. So they don't just stay in the eastern part. And I attempted to find out, and I do know that some of them are moving across Hanover line into Louisa, because one of the best places I found them was on the Louisa County line. But I know also they're moving into Enrico. I've had reports of a particular area there. The landowner didn't want me on the property, but they are moving from a Hanover area over into Enrico, and they will anywhere else. So they move around a lot, maybe as much as 5 linear miles a day.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Groover. Looks like we're out of time for today. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to all of our guests for joining us today. Please do join us next week on Wednesday, January 20th at noon. We'll have Penn State researcher and doctoral student Jennifer Chen, and she will be presenting Females Hunted Too. Jennifer Chen did some work on an archaeological dig and found some Stone Age remains that were actually a female big game hunter. So definitely do join us next week to find out about that. You can register for next week's talk at smv.org. Each talk is free to attend and is open to the first 300 registrants. Thank you again for joining us today. Until next week, stay safe and stay curious. Thank you all for coming.